What's up, War Room? Welcome back. Recording Joe Caporoso, Connor Rogers, post pod. Hopefully, you heard the pod Tuesday night. We're going to use today's War Room to only talk about Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, maybe a little Sauce Gardner, but we really want to focus on what's going wrong with the young pups so far this season because we've gotten so many questions and it's been such a discussion point. If by the time you're listening to this, Devontae Adams is on the Jets, which probably is unlikely, we'll have a separate emergency pod for it. But just know we recorded this before anything happened. There's just rumors. CR, how we doing? You ready to talk about the young guns and what's wrong so far?
Not the combo I were hoping we were going to be having after week 4 of the season after a devastating loss, but the combo that needs to happen. And, I want to make this clear. We're not urging people to just immediately jump off the Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall bandwagon. These guys are going to be great players for this team, but it's a talking point worth having right now because the expectations were so high.
Yeah, you won't find, and you can listen to me, everything is saved on the Patreon. You won't find bigger Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall fans than Connor and I, especially with Garrett, like pre-draft. We've been talking about him since the January before he was drafted. We've said plenty of positive and maybe in some cases hyperbolic things about them. I do think we have a 4-game sample size now. And why, among the reasons I was most bummed after the loss was how bad those guys looked in terms of not playing to their potential. And it's one game's here or there, but now we're at 4 games and you look at Garrett's sample size and you start to try to ask yourself some hard questions. Now, I'm someone who's thought Garrett Wilson could be 1,400, 1,500 yards, 10 to 12 touchdowns, second team all-pro type guy, one of the best receivers in the league. If I take my Jets glasses off and I look at his sample size through 2.25 seasons, you see a guy who's more like 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, couple 100-yard games a year, but for the most part is like 60, 70 yards a week. What's been hard is that he's had such bad quarterback play. So how do you evaluate that? Now he's got better quarterback play. Through 4 games, Allen Lazard is the Jets' leading receiver. He's been their best receiver. Mike Williams has 10 targets with 8 catches and has drawn, I think, multiple pass interferences, has 16 yards per catch. And you have Garrett, who can't really get over 10 yards per catch right now, has 1 touchdown that was kind of forced to him in basically garbage time. And outside of like a couple moments against the Niners, he hasn't really like had those big plays yet. He lost a fumble. He's had a couple. And some of my initial takes, and we could get into this more, is like, are they using him wrong? And some of this is on him, right? His field awareness has to be better. He cannot have silly penalties. He has to deal with defenses focusing on him. But I just feel like sometimes they force him in the short to intermediate yak game, and that is not his strength. He's not a big guy. He can be loose with the football. I feel like he's more productive and exciting when he's down the field, on the deep post, on the 9 route. His big play against the Titans, over the shoulder on the 9 route. His big play against Broncos, down the sideline on the 9 route. Yes, he's had some effective things in the slot, on the slant routes, on the quick releases with Rodgers, but I feel like when they like manufacture these like waggle screens for him and smoke screens, there's just not much there. And I just wonder if that's not the player he is. But I also wonder, to be a great elite receiver in the NFL, you have to score touchdowns. And Garrett Wilson, for as great as he's been, just doesn't score touchdowns. Like he scored, I remember every single touchdown in his career to date because they've been so few and far between. He had 2 against the Broncos in the second game of his career. He had 2 in the Mike White game against the Bears when he came in. He had a garbage time 1 from Tim Boyle. He had the garbage time 1 against the Pats. And then he had the 2 last year in week 1 and week 2. But
the Dallas was the big one.
The Dallas
one.
Cowboys. That's the one that, hey, could we do that like every other week? Because that's what CeeDee Lamb does. That's what Justin Jefferson does. That's what a lot of these other guys do. That's what Nico Collins does. And I have to check myself and say, look, maybe is Garrett just a top 25 guy, which is pretty damn good. He's going to have 1,000 yards roughly every year. He's a top 20 receiver in the league. He's not going to be a top 6 or 7 guy. I think it's too premature to say that, but I think it's fair to challenge ourselves and ask that question because I think objectively, I look at a guy like a Nico Collins and I'm like, is Garrett really better than him yet? Like, is he a better? I know he has CJ Stroud, but you watch him play and you watch 100 yards, 100 yards, 100 yards. Like, it's time for Garrett now. It's time to go have 150 yards like 2 out of the 3 weeks in a row if you want to be that guy. And not on the same page. The illegal motion, the false start, the not getting your feet down in bounds, that's year one stuff. The fumbling, that can't happen anymore. So that's about the most negative you'll ever hear me be about Garrett Wilson. And it comes from a point of frustration because I think he could be among the best, if not the best receiver in Jets history on pure talent alone. I agree with that take. Like, he's that physically gifted. And when he gets going, he can be unstoppable. He was, speaking of the Vikings, he was unstoppable against the Vikings in Minnesota a few years ago. And if Mike White was a smidge more accurate, he would have had about 240 yards receiving in that game. Completely uncoverable. That's the guy I want to see, and I know he's capable of being. And maybe a Devontae trade loosens that up a little bit for him, and he's really ready to be that guy next year. But did we get over our skis with Garrett? And is he like more of like that secondary guy than that top guy?
I'm not ready to waver on this one. I think he looks completely fine on tape. I think there's a lot of variables here after 4 games, right? Is that one, and it's interesting as we're having this conversation, Rich Cimini tweeted out a quote from Garrett on Bart and Hahn. He does a weekly on Bart and Hahn. Garrett said, I don't think we do a lot of different stuff, to be honest. I watch football on Sundays, and I see a lot of teams mix it up and stuff like that. I don't think we do that. I think we know our identity. It's just about going out and executing it or figuring out if it's going to work. I don't think we're trying a lot of different things. I know personally my route tree hasn't been what it has been the last 2 years as far as the stuff I've been running. It's just about figuring out if it's the right identity and whether it's going to win games. That to me, and I'll get to my thoughts on Garrett in a minute, just says that they're kind of lining up and thinking, this is who we are, and let's see if it's going to work today. Rather than, I mean, you're talking about, he's saying he has a less complex route tree now. Why? You have a guy that could throw the ball at any point of the field. So that's very confusing to me. Needs to be figured out. I do think his usage has hurt him. I don't think he's been amazing. I want to make that clear. But I think his usage has hurt him. I'll say this too. Rodgers so far has been way too hesitant, besides the free play opportunities, to just give him shots down the field. And that's got to stop. It's got to stop. I don't care about the interception numbers. Garrett would have bigger numbers if Rodgers just took a couple shot plays to him per game. And there's a couple that he's been open, and it's okay to miss guys. It happens. But we have a sample, like a very small sample size. When they do push the ball down the field to him, it feels like good things happen more often than not. So why aren't we doing that? So, like all things, it lies somewhere in the middle that Garrett needs to be a little bit better because we know he's just so talented that he can be. Hackett needs to be a lot better. And Rodgers, this is the one area Rodgers needs to step it up a little bit. I think you need to throw Garrett the ball down the field a little more. Listen, if you want Lazard and Conklin and even Mike Williams to be these timing guys in the short and intermediate, but this offense still needs to get vertical, and that's Garrett in this. Garrett could do everything, but if you want him to be the vertical guy, that doesn't, to me, take a ton of thinking, right? He's either going to gain a step or he's not, and he's a guy that can gain a step often or draw a flag. So let me say this, because we're going to transition here. My concern level, like if we're just on a scale of 100 with Garrett and Breece, I'm at an 80 on the Breece side and a 20 on the Garrett side. I want to make that clear. I watched the tape, and I think Garrett Wilson looks generally fine. I think he hasn't been as good as we hoped for. I also think there are a lot more variables out of his control that I believe are going to get better, and Garrett Wilson is going to have a really good season. I also think, to be fair, there are variables out of Breece's control, but there are Breece aspects right now, physically, that I am concerned about.
Make sure to sign up for Underdog using promo code Badlands for all of our higher and lower picks. They have a deposit match up to $1,000. We drop picks before Thursday, before Saturday, before every Jets game. CR, how you feeling so far this season?
Pretty good. Pick'em's been a lot of fun. You get a couple freebies every now and then thanks to Underdog. So we've been all over the prop pick'ems, having a ton of fun with that, tracking our best ball drafts throughout the year. That's why we draft for months and months and months, keep up with them now. So it's been awesome.
Make sure to sign up today using code Badlands with Underdog. So I think it's all fair. And I think he doesn't look like he's that far away, which is encouraging prospectively. But then let's talk about Breece. So Breece is expected to effectively be like, outside of Christian McCaffrey, the best fantasy football player in the NFL this year, expected to cruise over 1,000 yards. two-way player, factor in the run game, factor in the pass game. He's gotten in the end zone a few times this year, had an exceptional touchdown catch against the Titans. But through 4 games, it's kind of been troubling that he's averaging 3.1 yards per carry. Braylon Allen's averaging almost 2 more yards than him. Now, you could say Breece is softening up the defense. He's in harder situations. He's doing more of the dirty work. But Allen's also done really well with his short yardage opportunities. Breece hasn't. He looks, I want to say, a little hesitant, almost not fully healthy. We haven't seen him really kick it into that gear. He's had one, I think, 30-yard run against the Titans in the second half. He just hasn't looked like the guy that we saw at times late last year, the Texans game, the Washington game, the Pats game. When he ripped off the huge run against Denver, we haven't seen the home runs. And is he struggling with the reality that Allen is going to have to play a big part in this offense and he's going to be in platooning more than he expected? Is he, to some of what Saleh called out last year of all things, is he being a little too patient and not just putting his head down and getting north and south when that's how this offensive line is built? It's just not, it's not there yet. It hasn't really clicked. There's been a couple moments, most specifically in the Titans game, where you're like, yeah, that's what we thought. And he had a couple moments in the Pats game too, to be fair to him, where the juice looked there. But it just seemed like from the first snap of that Denver game, he just was, you could kind of tell right away. He just didn't seem in it. And I don't ever want to speak or guess on someone's mental state because who the hell knows? But he just didn't look into the game. And the Jets need him to be great, just like they need Garrett to be great for this offense to really reach capacity. So what are you seeing from Breece so far?
With Breece, I think the blocking in front of him hasn't been great, honestly. But I wonder if that's, with Breece, it feels like they are making an effort